scheduled meeting of the Behavior, Evolution, and Culture Seminar Series. We typically meet every Monday at noon at this time in this place, and we will again resume in the winter quarter, but luckily we have one extra special talk that's coming up next week, and it's actually going to be on Wednesday from 12 to 1:30, and that's Christophe Bosch who's going to be coming and talking. And the title of his talk is The Ecology of Cooperation and Altruism in Humans and Chimpanzees. And Professor Bosch is the director of the Department of Primatology at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, so we're very lucky to have him come and speak, and I hope you can all make it despite the fact that it's scheduled during finals week. Today we're happy to have Jen Smith coming to talk. She's currently a postdoc both with the Center for Society and Genetics, who is a sponsor of this seminar series, and through the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. And she's going to be talking about kinship structure, patterns of cooperation, and social network dynamics in the spotted hyena.
Well, thanks, Brooke. And Brooke actually didn't mention this, but the first time I met Brooke was when we did a study abroad together in Kenya. So we spent time there as undergraduates, and then I went back and did this work as my PhD. So thanks, Brooke, for inviting me and organizing this, and Leo for setting this up. A number of the people in this room have actually inspired the research that I'm going to talk about today. We even have a past holocampian in the room as well. So hopefully this will be fun to see a non-primate example doing kinds of cooperative behavior. So by way of background, I'm going to start way back with Charles Darwin. So when Charles Darwin originally proposed the theory of natural selection, he posited that natural selection should favor selfish behavior. So those individuals that act selfishly should be most likely to pass on their genes and have the highest fitness. And this worldview can be summarized through reference to Alfred Lloyd Tennyson's poem, in which he wrote that nature is red in tooth and in claw. And sure enough, if we look across the natural world, we see many examples of all-out competition where individuals are fighting vigorously with conspecifics. They've evolved weaponry to fight with each other for access to resources and mates necessary for survival and reproduction. So yes, competition is intense in the natural world. However, as many of you know in this group, we also see many examples of cooperation across a number of taxonomic groups, and in fact, cooperation is quite prolific as well. And we've talked about cooperation in this group with respect to human societies, both within societies and among societies of humans. Humans are quite cooperative. And given that cooperation is so pervasive, this has actually given rise to a large body of theoretical work. So there are a number of theoretical workers, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you a sampling of the different types of theoretical workers that have spent careers trying to explain the evolution and the maintenance of cooperation in the natural world. So in my work, I've been testing a number of these theoretical predictions using spotted hyenas as an example, and asking questions about the evolutionary forces favoring cooperation in these social carnivores. And I hope I can convince you that spotted hyenas are particularly interesting for studying patterns of cooperation. They live in these large social groups. So all members of the group are comprised of, they all recognize each other as unique individuals, and they belong to this big social group which we call a clan. So there are 80 or 90 animals in this clan, and they all defend a common territory. And clan members are characterized in their social interactions based on patterns of cooperation and competition. And spotted hyena social groups are quite different from most other social carnivores. So most social carnivores live in these groups comprised solely of kin, and the groups tend to be smaller than those of spotted hyenas. Spotted hyena societies are actually more similar to those of old world monkeys, such as Cercopithecine primates, and spotted hyena clans are characterized by hierarchical social relationships, and they're comprised of both kin and non-kin. So these social groups are actually quite similar in their structure to troops of baboons. So let me show you what I mean by this. If we look at a baboon troop, such as this one here, we have multiple matrilines of baboons, and these are comprised of adult females, their juvenile offspring, and multiple reproductive males. So they're skew, as we heard about last week, but in any case, there are multiple overlapping generations in these complex societies. And hyena groups are actually quite similar in their structure to these baboon troops. So if we take a group of spotted hyenas, which we call a clan, we can organize them based on matrilines. So matrilines are kin groups, and these are adult females, they're juvenile offspring, and each matriline in the clan can be ranked in a linear dominance hierarchy. And within a matriline, members are closely related to each other, but among matrilines, they're actually they have low genetic relatedness to each other. So the average relatedness across a clan is actually quite low. Within a matriline, we can organize, or the hyenas do this, I keep saying we, but spotted hyenas will organize based on dyadic fights in a linear dominance hierarchy. So here we have bracket shoulder is the alpha female in our clan, and she is the highest ranking female. I'm going to use this rank ordering throughout the talk. So the highest ranking one is 1, and it goes down in a linear order. And across other matrilines, individuals can also be ranked within a dominance hierarchy. Now you might notice that I'm mapping here just adult females. So spotted hyenas have female dominance, which makes them pretty rare among mammals. And these females also have repeated social interactions because they're philopatric, meaning that they remain in their home group throughout their lives. So most of my work has been studying these adult females because these are the most powerful social allies within the hyena group. Although natal hyenas, so hyenas born to bracket shoulder, for example, if bracket shoulder has kids, her kids rank below her in the dominance hierarchy. But if she has a son and that son wants to reproduce, he actually has to leave this clan and join a new clan, so that immigrant males come in all the way at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, and they queue for status. So there's variation in kinship within these groups and social rank. And these are extremely important, and I've been focusing on asking questions about these two different types of variables. In addition, hyenas cooperate in a number of different ways, one of which is forming a coalition. And they can form coalitions where 2 or more hyenas join forces and attack a common victim. They can do this within a clan. So this is within group, intra-group coalition formation. And they also do this when they are forming these large coalitions to attack members of another clan. And these clan wars, what we call them, they escalate and can be quite intense and settle. The outcomes of these events can determine territory boundaries, so they're quite important for reproductive outcomes. So given this similarity in the social structure between Cercopithecine primates and these spotted hyenas, this provides actually a very unique opportunity to compare patterns of cooperation within this carnivore and some species of primates, because these animals last shared a common ancestor 100 million years ago, so they're quite different. And so I've been making this comparison to understand what the general principles are for explaining patterns of cooperation. Okay, so you're probably sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, spotted hyenas, baboons, they're quite different. So there are also quite a number of differences, and of course baboons actually feed primarily on vegetative matter, so on forbs and fruits, things like this, whereas this is the menu for spotted hyenas. And so hyenas can actively hunt all of these species shown here. They hunt 80% of their own food, so forget about what you heard on The Lion King. And hyenas can actually hunt all of these species of the foreground here by themselves, and it takes about 8 hyenas they can take down a zebra. Working in teams. So hyenas will cooperate during hunting. So we can have teams of hyenas that are more successful in capturing prey than our lone hunters. And once they acquire this prey, they work together again in teams to defend this resource from lions who like to come along and kleptoparasitize these kills once they're made. So cooperation is quite important in this domain as well. And once food is available, social rank determines priority of access to these resources. And as you can imagine, this fresh meat is ephemeral and very rich. And so competition over resources is quite intense in these species. So food is quite important in the lives of hyenas. And social rank determines access to this food. And social rank also determines fitness in hyena societies. Now, another difference between hyenas and troops of baboons are that hyenas actually live in societies structured by fission-fusion dynamics. So like humans or chimpanzees that we'll hear about next week, spotted hyenas live in these societies where they are frequently fissioning, so splitting apart from one another and coming back together at fusion events. And in fact, spotted hyenas, although they're in these large social groups, spend roughly a third of their time by themselves, separated by about 1 kilometer from each other. And these are in subgroups, we call them by themselves, or subgroup size of 1. And the composition changes roughly every half hour. So these are very fluid societies. And for example, if we follow a given adult female here who has a radio collar, and we follow her on 2 different occasions, so follow A and follow B. If we follow her for 24-hour cycles during the evening hours, the daylight hours here, and the evening hours again, we can see that the variation in her subgroup size, where if she's by herself, she's in a subgroup size of 1, it changes dynamically across a day, and there's also variation across days. So these, again, are very fluid societies, and social partner choice varies based on these fission-fusion dynamics. So I won't have time to really talk about this work here, but it's important for you to know that hyenas can actively maintain these social partner relationships through patterns of association, but they actually need to do so by walking up to each other and actively maintaining relationships. And we found out that if we follow a preferred social partner here and we quantify the number of times she's joined by conspecifics, that there's variation here in terms of partner choice, and that hyenas will actively go out of their way to join each other, and that over time these build up to explain patterns of preferred social partner choice. But here, what I'm mainly going to focus on is answering these 3 questions. So first, does ecology constrain sociality and cooperation within these animals? Second, which evolutionary forces favor intergroup coalitions? And finally, how are social ties maintained in these dispersed social networks? So my work is actually part of this long-term study. It was initiated back in 1988 by Kay Holkamp and Laura Smale. And this work has been done here in East Africa, in Kenya, in the Masai Mara. And throughout the duration of the study, we've been following the same group of spotted hyenas. And every day, twice a day, we go out and we watch them from our field vehicles. So these hyenas are habituated to us, and we recognize them based on their spot patterns, and we record all incidences of greetings, so hyenas greeting together, dyadic aggression with one hyena attacking another hyena, and also patterns of coalition formation where 2 or more hyenas join forces to attack the same victim. We know maternal relatedness based on nursing associations, but we also will regularly dart these animals. So I have a anesthetized hyena here, and we will collect blood samples, run genetic analyses, and determine paternity. So we know maternal and paternal relatedness. So when I'm talking about kinship here, I'm talking about genetic relatedness for most of this talk. Yeah?
Are they hunting primarily diurnally?
So they're hunting, so there's a paper, recent paper on activity patterns. And so actually the activity pattern that I showed you where the subgroup sizes are changing, the hyenas are typically, in this earlier period during the evenings, they're typically coming together and hunting during those times. They're most active crepuscularly, but they're actually shifting their, the time at which they're active. They are becoming more nocturnal than they used to be because of human perturbations. But anyway, that's a whole nother.
So do you watch them at night?
We do watch them at night. So part of this work was to use night vision goggles to watch them at dens and watch them during 24-hour cycles. Most of the work is during daylight hours, but we do start off in the morning when it's dark. So it's a combination, yeah. Okay, so does ecology constrain sociality and cooperation? For this work, I've been testing the ecological constraints hypothesis. And this hypothesis was put forward to explain patterns of fission-fusion dynamics where species have retained the ability to split off from group members when they might otherwise benefit from living in large social groups. So this hypothesis predicts that resource competition should limit gregariousness. And in particular, gregariousness might be limited over long time scales and also over short time scales. So first I'm going to look at long patterns of association over periods of months and how ecology may constrain sociality over these long periods. And as I told you, hyenas do hunt their food, and so during most of the months of the year, prey are fairly scarce. But during the months of June through September, as shown here, prey is super abundant, and this relaxes feeding competition. So we predicted that hyenas should be most gregarious during periods of these super abundant prey. And this was really exciting. So we look at different months of the year, and from January through December, which we're quickly heading into, if we look at prey abundance, we can see that most months of the year prey are relatively rare, and then there's a super abundance of prey June through September, and then prey abundance then declines as well. And here our measure is the proportion of times where hyenas are seen with another conspecific. And what we see is that hyenas are less gregarious during most months of the year, but then there's relaxed feeding competition, and hyenas are much more gregarious here, and then they decrease their level of gregariousness. So this is consistent with the idea that food is limiting sociality in these animals. So this is operating at the clan level. So what we wanted to do next was to take a social network approach and to ask, how does ecology constrain social network structure, and how does this influence relationships among kin and among non-kin? So here I have members of a clan. I'm just showing you natal animals. These are adults, which are here, these large circles, which we call nodes, are adults, and these smaller circles here, these smaller ones are subadults. And individuals that are of the same color are within the same family group or the same matriline. So here all the brown ones are in the alpha matriline with a rank of 1. Matriline 2 is here. And what we've done is we've constructed a weighted network. And for each of these social connections, we construct a weight, and we do this based on a twice weight association index. So this is Carnes and Schwager's index, and what we do is we record the proportion of times where two hyenas, so A and B, the proportion of times hyenas A and B are seen together out of the number of times we've seen them all overall. And then we use this association to then construct these weights within the overall network. And remember, our goal of doing this was to ask how ecology structures these social networks. And I'm just showing you one calendar year. We're actually starting it in February so we can capture these 4-month periods with low prey abundance, high prey abundance, and then low prey abundance again. And hopefully what you can see here visually, and I'll show you the compiled data in a minute, is that the strength of the social relationships are greatest when prey are locally abundant. So when there's high prey, these social relationships are most strong, but we see them decreasing in their strength during times of low prey abundance. What was really interesting here is that although ecology constrained these social relationships, their consistent kinship preference emerged across all of the networks. So they maintained consistent relationships with kin when prey was low, when it was high, and then again when it was low. And I'll show you this in a little more detail here. I've broken up the different constituents that were in that social network, and there's variation across different life history stages. And hopefully you can see this. I can put that down for those of you who are there. We have our den cubs. So den cubs are essentially parked at the communal den, and they're not able to make social choices on their own. So everything, they're sort of passive, and animals are showing up to them. But what you can see is as these individuals mature from den cubs, graduate the den, start wandering around the territory as subadults, and finally mature into adults, the standardized strength of their relationships decreases. And what this means is that hyenas are becoming more picky, or they're having more differentiated social relationships as they become more mature. This standardized strength, for those of you that have worked with association patterns, is simply a way of taking an average of patterns of association. So it's the mean association from a given hyena's perspective. And we did this so that we could compare over this 20-year period dynamics across many different size clans of social networks. So there's variation here across life history stages. And within even den cubs, you see this preference for relationships with kin over non-kin. And this is consistent across the different life history stages, so subadults, adults, and we finally see a sex difference here between adult females and adult males. And these are just natal animals still, but we're seeing a sex difference at this stage as males are starting to get ready to disperse. Yeah?
Is the B aberration statistically significant, or just some oddity? Where low play periods have a little bit higher?
Yep. So the statistics that I used here are non-parametric statistics, and they're all done based on the individual's perspective. And what I've done is looked at variation across life history stage, which is showing this, but then within each category I've done Wilcoxon matched pair tests. So individuals are, the same individual is represented in both categories, and each of these represents statistical differences if they are different. So these are actually statistically the same within cubs, but then as you move across in the later stages, each of these are emerging as differences. And you can see that at these later stages that during periods of high prey, they're much more social, and low prey, they are less social. And this is consistent across the board. So it's at this point where ecology is really constraining these social relationships, and animals are becoming more selective.
When males disperse, do they does kin go together, or they disperse separately?
You know, it's a really interesting question. We don't know as much about male dispersal as we would like to know. They typically will leave one at a time. We found one of our guys joining a clan nearby and meeting up with his brother at that clan, but that I think is fairly rare. So typically it's an individual process. They're coming in and they're queuing for reproductive success. So it's usually a fairly competitive process, but it'd be great to see if we could monitor them. So maybe not leaving together, but coming in together is possibly something to look at. And maybe coalitions are involved, we don't know. So. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that over these long time scales that social networks are constrained by the local ecology, but hyenas also have these hour-to-hour decisions that they're making with respect to their social behavior. So we'd also expect that if ecology is constraining sociality, that short-term energy gain might decrease as subgroup size increases at these intense feeding situations. And what we found was that this was in fact the case. So if we look at the number, are you guys able to, yeah, okay. If you look at the number of adult females here present in a subgroup, as the number increases, the per capita energy gains, the amount of food that an individual hyena is able to consume over time, and these are daily rates, it decreases based on the number of competitors that are present with her. So on average, hyenas do best actually feeding by themselves. And this is in contrast to something like wild dogs, where they actually have the opposite pattern. So it really seems that hyenas are constrained by competitors, and of course there are rank differences here and so on and so forth, but in general, feeding competition is constraining these subgroup sizes to form. And given that I told you earlier that hunting pairs are about 19% more likely to capture prey than are hyenas working by themselves, and the addition of a third, fourth, and so on of hunters fails to increase this hunting success subsequently, I wanted to know, well, if hyenas are benefiting from cooperatively hunting, but there's this cost of feeding competition once prey are down, how do these costs and benefits relate to each other? So to get at this question, I compared patterns of feeding when hyenas either made a hunt by themselves or worked in pairs to obtain food. And I matched the size of the prey that they captured and asked how this related to feeding competition after kills were made. So specifically, if we look at time after a hunt, and we start at time 0 where hyenas made a kill by themselves, or started hunting with a pair, and they originally were feeding just in a pair of 2 hunters. We then asked how many hunters, or how many more competitors joined them subsequently. What we can see is that hyenas that originally started by themselves remained in these groups alone. So they were in these small groups, and they're able to get quite fat. So a hyena can actually increase their body size by about a third within a single sitting, and they can consume meat and bone at a rate of 1.3 kilograms a minute. So hyenas are just gobbling this down by themselves. However, hyenas that were nicely cooperating with each other here quickly turn into competitors, and they are loud and noisy, and they attract more competitors to the scene. So if we average over this 15-minute period, hyenas are actually feeding on average in a subgroup with 5 other competitors. So we wanted to then know, well, how does this translate to the amount of time hyenas spend feeding? So feeding in a group by yourself or feeding with 5 competitors. And what we found is if you look at the number of adult females present in a subgroup, that hyenas that are feeding by themselves are feeding virtually all of the time, whereas hyenas that are feeding with competitors in these subgroups about 5 are roughly feeding about half of the time. So this suggests to me that although pairs are 19% more likely to capture food, that the costs of competition after a kill is made overwhelm the benefits of cooperating. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask, well, which evolutionary forces favor intergroup coalition formation? And this work I've been focusing on adult females and asking for situations where we have 2 hyenas that are fighting with each other. So we talked about feeding competition's intense, so hyenas will fight with each other to maintain dominance relationships. If 2 hyenas are involved in a contest with each other, a third animal has the choice. She can either come in, intervene in that fight, or just stand by and watch. If A intervenes to help B, she's then donating support to B, and A and B join forces and attack the same victim. By doing so, this is costly to A, but B is benefiting and is more likely to win this fight. So we tested 3 different hypotheses. The first is that A may gain inclusive fitness benefit by helping B if A and B are relatives. It might be that there's reciprocal altruism. So A and B, A might help B now, but then at a later time with a time delay, B will help A. And there might be reciprocal exchanges among non-kin. And finally, A may actually do this out of self-interest. So she may gain a direct benefit from helping B and immediately gain this benefit. So we're actually straightforwardly able to rule out reciprocal altruism. So for the sake of time, I won't talk about our data here, but we used all the standard techniques and found absolutely no evidence of reciprocal altruism. But we did, however, find support for both kin selection and direct benefits. So I'll focus on these two hypotheses. So here we assign pairs of adult females to 3 different kinship categories. Close kin were mothers and daughters, full sisters. Distant kin or half-sisters, aunts, nieces, grandmothers, granddaughters. This is based on genetic data. And we also had non-kin that were based on genetic assignment with a very low R value. And from these assignments of kinship, we then constructed cooperation networks. And we wanted to see how the density of these cooperation networks varied across these different kinship categories. So I'll orient you to this network. This is actually structured a little bit differently from the last one. Each of these represents an adult female. This node here, the largest one, is bracket shoulder, the alpha female, and the smaller ones are lower ranking females. And here, hyenas that are connected with these dotted lines represent pairs of hyenas that were unrelated to each other. So each of these hyenas had the opportunity to provide coalitionary support to each other. And what we found was that although there are a number of these pairs of unrelated females that could provide support to each other, we saw very few instances where these females actually took advantage of these opportunities. So here, White Rabbit is helping HG, Seinfeld, JJ, JJ is helping Navajo. Yes, they all have names, that's just handy in the field. And you can see there's a very low proportion of these dyads are actually capitalizing on this opportunity to provide support. So if you calculate the density of this network, it's very low. However, if we go and we now do this for distant kin, so here these are distantly related individuals, you can see that higher proportion of these dyads are now providing support to each other, and you start to see reciprocal support emerging, which we didn't see for unrelated dyads. And finally, when we move across to our close kin category, we see that hyenas have the highest density of support. Although they're the fewest number of dyads in this cooperation network, the greatest proportion of these dyads are actually providing support to each other, and the thickness of these lines is increasing. So now I'll show you these 3 different kinship categories so you can see how cooperation varies among them. Okay, so non-kin, moving to distant kin, the density is increasing, and finally to close kin. So it really seems that hyenas are making decisions about coalitionary support based on their genetic relatedness. They're doing this based on paternal and maternal relatedness to beneficiaries of support. However, the extent to which hyenas cooperated varied based on the audience. So what we mean here is that hyenas give coalitionary support in different circumstances. They live in these fission-fusion societies, so they can actually intervene in an ongoing fight here with no one around them, so this female can provide support, or they can do so when there are various numbers of high-ranking animals in the immediate audience. And for hyenas, it's actually more risky to provide support in circumstances that look like this as the number of dominant bystanders increases. So we predicted that hyenas might be less likely to provide support to individuals that are less related to themselves based on this audience effect. And what we found was that hyenas are actually more picky when providing support to distant kin and non-kin, and they varied the amount of support that they provided based on whether or not high-ranking animals were in the audience, and the extent to which they provided support decreased as the number of these dominant bystanders increased. Now, what was really interesting and kind of surprising at first was that donors actually were okay with providing support to close kin and did so regardless of the number of females that were present in the audience. So they're actually, when they're making these decisions, they're monitoring the composition of these subgroups at the time of the decision. So kinship seems to be quite important in structuring these coalitionary events. But in addition, we also found that hyenas are gaining direct benefits from providing coalitionary support. So here, this is actually a coalitionary attack network. So here, we have our high-ranking animals that are attacking down the dominance hierarchy towards these low-ranking females. What you can see is that these rates of attack are always generating down the dominance hierarchy. So although hyenas are helping their kin when they form these coalitions, they're actually benefiting directly by reinforcing their own dominant status. So these interventions are fairly cheap. They're able to reinforce their dominance, and they do so typically when there's no food around, so they're doing it in low-cost situations. They vary this based on how much food is present or absent, and are basically joining oftentimes when this is a low-intensity fight as well. So they're definitely gaining a direct benefit here as well. And I don't have time to go into this, but as part of this work, I actually reviewed the existing literature, and I thought this group might find this to be interesting, thinking about, do patterns of coalition formation among primates and non-primates systematically differ from each other? And I measured a variety of different quantitative traits, and I found absolutely no difference. It might be statistical power, so maybe years from now we'll have a better picture of this. We found no difference in hourly rates, coalition sizes, and even the evolutionary forces favoring patterns of coalition formation. So maybe we can talk more later about this. But I did just want to suggest that in general, among Cercopithecine primates, such as these baboons here, we tended to find that there's evidence of kin bias supports and direct benefits. So again, as in our hyenas, we weren't finding just one hypothesis or the other, we were finding evidence of both. So this was particularly interesting to us. And okay, so I've told you that hyenas live in these dispersed social networks, but they come together and cooperate with each other. And so our next question is we wanted to understand how hyenas are maintaining these social alliances within their clans. And we did this by asking about this behavior called greeting behavior. So these are actually two adult females. This is an adult female with her fully erectile pseudopenis, and she has given birth through this, but she also urinates and copulates through this fully erectile pseudopenis. So this is a particularly risky and intimate behavior when two hyenas greet with each other. They stand head to tail with each other, they sniff each other's anogenital region, and they expose this vulnerable area to the jaws of their greeting partner. So why are they doing this? Given there's this potential cost, why are they doing this? And this is happening most often when hyenas have been separated and they come back together at a fusion event within about 5 minutes, typically within 10 sometimes, hyenas will greet with each other. So I'm going to show you what a greeting looks like and then try to explain what its function is. So here we have, I'm going to show you a video where this hyena here has been present in a subgroup, and this hyena on the left is walking up and is making a choice. There are a number of hyenas she could greet with, but she's gone out of her way to initiate a greeting with this hyena. When she does so, she walks up and she's going to lift her leg. She's erecting her pseudopenis. They're sniffing each other, and then this other hyena is then lifting her leg. And we consider that to be a greet. Okay, so what's explaining this greeting behavior? Well, we knew from previous work that in some situations, if two hyenas have fought with each other, that they might greet immediately after fighting, and by greeting, this actually reduces the tendency to fight again. So we call this a conciliatory greet, and this accounts for about 9% of greetings. In my work, I wanted to explain the other 91% of greetings. So what are they doing when they haven't previously fought? And I actually just got the proofs today. So this is a finally impressed animal behavior. So I will be happy to share that. Yay. But in any case, so what do these non-conciliatory greetings signal? And so we tested 3 current hypotheses that have emerged in the literature. And the first is that greetings might signal submission, they might reduce tension, or they might actually reinforce social bonds. the first prediction from the submission hypothesis has to do with the direction of these greetings. So I told you that hyenas are in these dominance hierarchies. These are adult females. If you have someone like Kip here, this submission hypothesis predicts that Kip will only initiate greetings up the dominance hierarchy, but she should never initiate them down the hierarchy because this will represent a rank reversal. In addition, we expect that the frequency of greetings should vary based on rank relationships. So hyenas that are close in the dominance hierarchy to each other, so Kip and Whoopi here are adjacently ranked. They have a rank distance of 1. These hyenas should have the greatest need to reinforce dominance relationships. So we'd expect that hyenas with similar ranks or small rank distance should greet at a higher proportion of the time than hyenas that have distant ranks such as bracket shoulder and LG. They should be fairly secure. They might not need to reinforce this as often. And finally, we'd expect that the direction of these signals should be consistent across contexts. We know that hyenas do a number of signals, like putting their ears back, tail behind their leg, different things like this that signal submission across contexts. We'd expect greetings to also be consistent across contexts, if they're in fact signaling submission. Second, it might be that greetings reduce tension. So hyenas come together at a fusion event. This might be a tense situation where hyenas need to reestablish social bonds and maybe prevent costly fighting. So if this reduces tension at fusion, we'd expect hyenas to that have greeted with each other to fight less often than females that come together and fail to greet. And greetings should occur most often among females with insecure social relationships. So these are unrelated individuals or females that are kin but are distantly associating with each other. And under the circumstances where tensions are highest, females should greet most often per opportunity. So at kill scenes, when there's food there and they're competing, tensions might be high. These might be a mechanism for reducing tensions. And alternatively, it might be that females are reinforcing social bonds. So this is in contrast to the tension reduction. Hyenas might actually greet to promote cooperation. And here we'd expect females with the most secure social relationships, so kin and closely associating non-kin, should greet most often per opportunity. And these greetings should be most prominent in neutral contexts where there's no resource at stake. Females are just coming together to reinforce social bonds. Okay, so we tested first this prediction from the submission hypothesis having to do with the directionality of greetings. And we predicted that if greetings signal submission, so here's a dominance hierarchy, we expected that the structure of greeting initiations should directly follow or coincide with that of a dominance hierarchy. So here we have adult females, bracket shoulder to Legolas. This is 3 years of data where these females have extremely rigid dominance hierarchies. Kip here is winning fights against females below her in the dominance hierarchy, and she only loses fights, so Kip here is losing fights only against females above her in the dominance hierarchy. So the directional consistency of these dominance hierarchies is extremely high. It's actually close to 1, and the linearity is also statistically significant. So we use this to compare patterns of greeting behavior. And we expected that subordinates should lift leg, initiate these greetings, and dominants should always receive greetings. However, we found that these patterns are quite different. So this is a greeting matrix, and here we have recipients of greetings and initiators of greetings. These black boxes, remember, were the predominant direction of outcomes of fights. And here, these black boxes represent the predominant direction of greetings within a dyad. And what you can see visually, but we also have statistics, is that the directional consistency is actually 0.65. So it's different from this one, but we confirmed this by bootstrapping these different matrices and comparing the difference in directional consistency. And we found that, yes, in fact, they are non-overlapping and they're significantly different from each other. And in fact, the linearity of the greeting matrix is not statistically significant.
What is linearity in this context?
So linearity is, it's the ability for, it's basically whether or not the outcomes of these interactions fall above this dominance line, the diagonal, yeah, transitivity, exactly, right. So we'd expect that we wouldn't have these circular triads. Yes, so it's a measure of the circularity of these triads. It counts them versus a null hypothesis. And actually, yeah, anyway, we can talk a little bit more. Yeah. So given that these don't seem to be simply signaling submission, that there are differences here based on the directionality of these greetings, we then wanted to test their alternative hypotheses and see what else might be going on. And so we built a statistical model. And we did this based on fusion events. So we had pairs of females, such as these two come here. They come together at a fusion event. A female arrives at a group, and they're actually fairly picky. So they only greet with about 7% of group members at these situations, arriving at a subgroup. So in some situations they greet, so that's a yes in our model. And in some situations they fail to greet, and that's a no in our binomial response. We have a number of predictor variables, and we determined the best subset of these variables based on the smallest AIC value in model comparison. Okay. So I first, in this model, added the covariate of subgroup size, and this is to account for variation in subgroup size, the number of potential partners that one could greet with. And I also have the 3 explanatory hypotheses here. And the first variable that was excluded from the model was rank distance. So this is not consistent with the submission hypothesis. Females that were arriving were no more likely to greet with females that were higher ranking than themselves or lower ranking than themselves when other important variables were retained in the model. Also, if we put in rank distance, this was rejected from our best model. So females of similar ranks were no more likely to greet than females of distant ranks. And this is accounting for opportunity. And finally, females that greet at a fusion event were no less likely to fight with each other than were females that failed to greet. So this is in contrast to the prediction of the tension reduction hypothesis. Okay, so what's going on here? So I'm going to retain these. So these were excluded from our best model, but I'll keep them up here just for a reference so that you can see them. The first variable that was really important in explaining and structuring greetings is food. So hyenas were actually less likely to greet. There's a negative relationship here between the presence of having a kill immediately in front. Hyenas are just showing up. They don't bother to greet with each other. So this is actually in contrast to the tension reduction hypothesis, but consistent with the social bonding hypothesis. In addition, females were more likely to greet or to form a coalition in the minutes after greeting than if they failed to greet. So the immediate act of greeting with a conspecific at fusion then often led to females joining forces in forming a coalition. So if we look at this in a little more detail, because this is pretty exciting to us, this is something that we had seen in the literature, but as far as we know, we hadn't actually seen the temporal matching here of having animals, those same animals greeting in the immediate context and then immediately forming a coalition. But for our hyenas, we actually found that if we look at hyenas that formed a coalition after fusion, the proportion of these coalitions that were formed, hyenas were less likely to form a coalition before greeting than after greeting. And they typically did this within about 2 minutes of forming, of greeting with each other. Then right after that, they would form a coalition if they were going to form one. So they didn't always form one, but when these two things were matched, they were temporally very close to each other. Is that working? Okay. So in addition to coalitions being formed quite often within groups where females were joining forces to target other group members after greeting with them, females also would cooperate in these intergroup coalitions, in these clan war situations, and would attack lions more often if once they come together, they greeted with each other. So they're checking each other's wristbands. Are you on my team? Are we all together in this? Checking motivational states, and then we'll then go ahead and form these large coalitions that are fairly risky. So all of these data are consistent with this social bonding hypothesis. In addition, patterns of genetic relatedness structured greeting behavior. So genetic kin were more likely positive relationship to greet than were unrelated conspecifics. But this actually interacted with the local prey abundance. So if you remember that ecology disrupts social networks, I showed you earlier, and when prey are super abundant, hyenas are spending more time together, but when prey are scarce, hyenas are spending less time together. So what we found was that kinship interacted with prey abundance. So this preference to greet with kin was actually strongest during times of year when prey scarcity most limits clan cohesion. And non-kin actually didn't vary their rates very much of greeting with each other. They did not greet very often overall, but kin were much more likely to greet when they had less opportunities to come together at these fusion events.
What do the stars signify?
Let's see, the stars represent, oh, right. These are statistically significant values as well. So what I used here, I used a modeling approach, and each of the variables that are retained here were explaining the most variation of in the model. You know all of this. Anyway, so the stars are just, if you're more of a frequentist approach, you can have that too. P-value 0.05.
Some people might.
Right, so they're there. But certainly, so that breaks down a little bit in this frequentist approach when you start getting into clan wars and things like that, because those are rare events. Okay, but still seems to be quite important. And in addition, after you've accounted for genetic kinship, closely associating individuals above and beyond this pattern generated by kinship are also greeting most often per opportunity. And finally, the absolute rank of the social partner also matters. So remember I told you earlier that the relative rank of the arriving female to a potential partner failed to be retained, as did rank distance in our model, but the absolute rank did matter. So if a female walks up to a group, she's more likely to greet the highest ranking individual in that group, but it's not that individual is higher or lower ranking than herself. It's just that hyena is actually the best social ally, the highest ranking animal, and probably the most important one to get up there and bond with. So we actually think this is consistent with the social bonding hypothesis as well. So these non-conciliatory greetings, just to wrap this all up, they appear to reinforce these affiliative ties. So hyenas are living in these dispersed fission-fusion societies where they're spending time separated from each other for long durations. When they come together, they often will engage in these greeting behaviors, especially with kin and closely associating non-kin. And the act of greeting will often result in hyenas forming these coalitions and reinforcing their dominance hierarchies and often forming coalitions with kin. So I hope I've convinced you that using hyenas as an example for studying cooperation is pretty interesting. So these hyenas actually will make these decisions to cooperate or not to cooperate based on multiple factors. They're doing so this is an individual hyena, and if we could have balloons here, these would be sort of ecological dynamics. Hyenas are tracking variation in the ecology. They're also doing these decisions based on their direct benefits, their indirect benefits, and they're monitoring the composition of the subgroups immediately around them when they're making decisions about cooperation. They're also using these ritualized signals when they come together to signal that they're willing to cooperate with potential allies. And with that, I'd like to thank all my funding sources and also these agencies in Kenya for their cooperation in making this work possible. And of course, This work was in collaboration with a number of co-authors, and especially my PhD advisor, Kay Holkamp here. She started this study back in 1988, so without her foresight, none of this would have been possible, and she was incredibly helpful at every stage of this process. The coalition work was in collaboration with Russ Van Horn, and the fission-fusion work was with Joe Kalowski, another School for Field Studies person with Brooke, and they were both collaborators, and most recently the social network analyses have been done in collaboration with Chris Strelayev, and then a number of undergraduates that have also been really helpful at all the different stages, and most of them have served as co-authors on majority of the papers coming out of this work. So thanks to them, and I'll take any questions.